On my good brother's 22nd birthday, he was beaten up. I am a black belt in Taekwondo. To protect him, I accidentally killed a thug. But in court, he changed his stance. Unwilling to testify for me, I was sentenced to 3 years in prison for manslaughter. After being released, I found out my good brother had married my girlfriend, and they had a daughter just over 2 years old. They wanted me to marry his sister, who had an intellectual disability. They said since I'd been in prison, I could only marry a woman like that. The next time I opened my eyes, I was back on my good brother's 22nd birthday. Because I was in bad shape, I got into a car accident. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my room. The time on my phone was indeed 3 years earlier. Only then did I realize I had truly returned. On my 22nd birthday, I stood before the mirror, preparing for the birthday banquet of my good brother, Tong Yi, whom I'd known since middle school. I made an effort to tidy myself up. Two messages popped up on my phone. One was from Tong Yi. He sent me a location, asking why I hadn't shown up yet. I chose this restaurant. He reminded me not to get lost. The other message was from my girlfriend, Ruyan. She sent a voice note, and when I opened it, I heard her sweet voice. Zhang Huai, are you ready yet? What time will you come to pick me up? I felt speechless inside. In my previous life, I thought they had nothing in common. On my birthday, Tong Yi and Ruyan met, but pretended not to know each other in front of me. Ruyan even complained about Tong Yi in front of me, saying she wasn't attracted to guys like him. Back then, I was quite naive, worrying that my girlfriend and my good brother wouldn't get along. I often played mediator between them, hoping they could get along smoothly. Who would have known? It's been 3 years since I got out of prison, and their child is already 2 years old. According to the timeline, the child must have been conceived around this time. I held back my anger towards them and sent Tong Yi a message. Sorry, I accidentally ate something bad and my stomach's upset. Feeling really nauseous now. I need to see a doctor first, so I can't attend your birthday party. Really sorry about that. I'll make it up to you later. My family was wealthier than Tong Yi's, and over the years, he constantly took advantage of me. He always acted very submissive towards me. He sent back a string of concerned voice messages, but I didn't listen. I was worried hearing his voice would make me sick. I also sent a message to Ruyan. I'm not feeling well. You should go by yourself. Before waiting for her reply, I muted her on WeChat. I glanced at the 2 gifts on my bed, which I had paid for, but were to be given in Ruyan's name. I even bought him a pair of limited edition sneakers. I wanted to throw them away, but after some thought, I realized money was innocent, so I decided to return both items. After getting a refund from the luxury store, I opened up my phone and scrolled through my Moments feed. I scrolled through Tong Yi's Moments feed. He had a trendy hairstyle, standing beside a cake, surrounded by people. Several photos were edited to make him look like an internet celebrity, though they barely resembled the real him anymore. And then there was Ruyan, standing right next to Tong Yi. She stood there smiling, her body slightly leaning towards him. At first glance, one might think they were a couple. Disgusting. Tong Yi and I were middle school classmates. His family was ordinary, but he had decent looks, when the rest of our classmates were plain and scruffy, looking dull and unattractive. He stood out, tall and lanky. Who knows how many girls' hearts he captured back then? When someone's admired by many, there are bound to be those who dislike him. That day after school, he was cornered by a group of thugs in an alley. The reason was simple. The girl those thugs liked had feelings for Tong Yi. As a child, I wasn't in good health, so my parents sent me to learn Taekwondo to stay healthy. Little did they know I had a talent for it. At a young age, I had no real competition. So when I saw Tong Yi being bullied, I stepped in, beating up those thugs and chasing them away. I reached out and helped the severely beaten Tong Yi up. From then on, despite our different personalities, we became good friends. I had a younger sister named Suwon Ruo. She was a little younger than us, smart and beautiful. With a shy personality, she was talented in many ways and a very popular girl at school. But she insisted on sticking with me all the time. Tong Yi had seen her a few times, his eyes wide open in amazement. He later asked me, noticing that my sister and I had different last names. He looked up at the honor roll, where Suwonruo's name was at the top. I didn't know how to explain it to him. Suwonruo's parents had both passed away. She had just moved into our house. Seeing my hesitation, Tong Yi shrugged at me. Rich people's family affairs. I won't pry too much. But he paused slightly, then stepped forward, pointing at Suwonruo's photo. You don't mind if I go after your sister, right? Back then, I didn't fully understand. It wasn't until my second life that I realized. From that moment on, Tong Yi seemed intent on taking things that belonged to me. The new sneakers I bought he'd borrow and wear them. The basketball I owned he'd take it to play. Even my friends he'd try to befriend them. And now, he wanted to pursue my sister. I was young and naive, unable to distinguish between people and dogs. When I found out Tong Yi wanted to chase after Suwonruo, I went straight to tell her. After listening, she glanced at me while working on her homework. Zhang Huai, where's your ID card? I was a bit confused, but still pulled it out from my bag. Here, I said. Suwonruo gave a slight, disdainful smile. Now tell me your age. At your age, even if you started dating 3 years from now, it'd still be considered early, let alone me, she added. Suwonruo was only a few months younger than me. I was in the 3rd year of middle school, and she was in the 2nd. She had been living with us since she was 10. At first, I quite enjoyed spending time with her. Having a beautiful sister at home was something every boy could boast about. But as we grew older, I started to think Suwonruo was just a quiet, awkward girl. In her early teens, she was a bit withdrawn, always keeping her emotions hidden. My dad always praised her, saying she would achieve great things in the future. But despite her usually calm demeanor, in my previous life, when I went to prison, I saw her eyes well up with tears multiple times. Maybe I had been a fool all along, always going along with whatever Tong Yi wanted. This time, for his birthday, I suddenly decided not to attend. The gifts he showed off didn't seem as fancy as before. So, right after posting on Moments, he called me. I didn't pick up. I glanced at the time. By now, they should have moved on from the restaurant to the next stop. They must be at the KTV by now. In my previous life, I was the one who paid for the KTV expenses. By the time we left the KTV, it was already late. Our other friends gradually got into their cars and drove off. But as Tong Yi stood by the roadside waiting for a ride, he was surrounded by a group of thugs. I found out later that Tong Yi had racked up a lot of debt buying luxury items, and he hadn't paid it back. These thugs had come to collect what was owed. When Ruyan and I drove out, we saw Tong Yi already beaten beyond recognition. The place was deserted, with no security in sight. Those thugs kept punching and kicking him, occasionally splashing water over his battered body. Seeing my friend being bullied, I immediately got out of the car and ran over to pull Tong Yi away. The thugs still wanted to make a move on me, but I had learned Taekwondo. I threw one of them to the ground with an over-the-shoulder throw. The others saw this, thinking they could jump in to help their friend. I struggled to handle 3 or 4 of them at once. Meanwhile, Ruyan stayed in the car, pretending not to see what was happening, too scared to get out. During the scuffle, I managed to break free, but lost control of my strength. I kicked one of the guys hard, and his head hit the ground. He lost consciousness. A passerby called the police. We were all taken to the police station. Later, I found out that the thug I had kicked died from severe brain trauma. My family hired the best lawyer they could find, but there was no surveillance footage at that place. Apart from us and the thugs, there were no other witnesses. It was clearly self-defense. But in court, my so-called good friend Tong Yi testified against me. He claimed that the guy was no longer attacking me, and that it was Zhang Huai who misunderstood, thinking I was being bullied. Even though my family spent a fortune, I was still sentenced to 3 years in prison. My parents aged overnight, and the usually composed Suwon Ruo looked at me with teary eyes. Brother, don't be afraid. I'll be here for you. I was sent to prison after that. Tong Yi came to visit me. He stood before me, eyes red with tears, putting on a regretful expression. But I felt no pity for him. It was as if he were the one who had suffered a great injustice. I'm sorry, Zhang Huai, he said, trembling with fear. Just like all the other times he had messed up, he showed me that pitiful, weak face. You'll forgive me, right? At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to tear him to pieces. I spent 3 years in prison, and it took me all 3 of those years to let go of the hatred I felt for him. But when I finally got out, the first news I received was that my good brother, Tong Yi, had married my girlfriend, Ruyan, and they even had a child over 2 years old. Was I angry? Yes, furious. Bitter, of course. So now that I had another chance, I decided to watch from the sidelines. To see them both torn apart by fate, I returned home, quietly waiting for that moment to arrive. At 1:30 in the morning, I got a call from Ruyan. I knew exactly what it was about, so I answered the phone. On the other end, Ruyan's voice was breathless, and I could hear noise in the background. Her tone was urgent. Zhang Huai, come to the police station. Something's happened to Tong Yi. The show was about to begin. When I arrived, the police station was in chaos. Shouting, swearing, police officers barking orders, and the wail of sirens outside all mixed together. Under normal circumstances, I would have found this noise annoying. But in that moment, it was music to my ears. Amidst the cacophony, it meant that I had completely been reborn. I was free from the tragedy of my previous life, and I was starting a new life of my own, with polished leather shoes gleaming beneath me. I walked with a light step, weaving through the crowd, until I stood in front of Ruyan. She looked disheveled, a cut on the corner of her mouth, her clothes torn. She kept her head down, but when she heard my footsteps, she looked up, and the first thing she said was, "Why didn't you come to Tong Yi's birthday party today?" I paused for a moment. How had I never noticed how accusatory Ruyan could be? I stared back at her. And what difference would it have made if I did? In my past life, when I saw Tong Yi being bullied, my first instinct was to rush down and help him. And as my girlfriend, Ruyan, who ended up cheating on me with Tong Yi, stayed in the car the whole time. Later, her excuse was that she had called the police from the car. But the truth was, it was a passerby who made the call. Perhaps my words angered her, because she stood up suddenly, glaring at me fiercely. Aren't you a black belt in Taekwondo? The last time we went out with Tong Yi and some thugs showed up, weren't you the one who beat them up? If I had gone this time, I would have been the one being bullied and beaten. You wouldn't have to feel sad, would you? Is that so? I asked. Ruyan froze, the arrogance draining from her face. She stared at me in disbelief. Did you find out about everything? She asked. I smiled faintly. What do you think? I didn't want to engage with Ruyan anymore. So I turned around and followed the female officer to see Tong Yi. He looked far worse than Ruyan. His clothes were completely torn, and his arm was broken. He was curled up on the bed, his expensive hairstyle now a messy bird's nest. He looked utterly pathetic. The female officer explained to me that after Tong Yi and the others left the KTV, they ran into the group of thugs. Ruyan said that after Tong Yi was dragged into the alley, she called the police, and only after notifying security did she try to help. Later, when Ruyan was pulled into the alley herself, Tong Yi grabbed a brick and smashed it on someone's head. Now, one of the thugs was lying in the ICU, fighting for his life. After the officer finished explaining, Tong Yi looked up at me, his face showing innocence. Zhang Hui double quotes he began, but I didn't rush forward to comfort him like before. Instead, I stayed where I was. He stared at me, confused. The officer sensed the tension, thinking we needed some privacy, and quietly excused herself. "Why are you standing so far away?" Tong Yi asked me. I kept my expression neutral. "I'm just here to check on you. There's nothing I can do to help. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Now that I've confirmed that, I'll head home. It's already late." I phrased it as politely as I could, but the truth was I came here to watch the spectacle. Tong Yi's face darkened instantly. In disbelief, there was a hint of blame in his voice. "Zhang Hui, what's that supposed to mean? Aren't we brothers? Look at me, I'm in this state. And you're still being so cold. I never thought you'd be this kind of person. I never thought you'd be this kind of person either." I cut him off. "Speaking bluntly, I considered you a friend. But did you ever truly see me as one?" Tong Yi blinked. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. I didn't want to waste more time on this. I came here to see them as the joke they've become. In my previous life, this night was my nightmare. The moment I lost control and pushed someone to the ground, my parents rushed to the scene. My mother, who had lived gracefully for most of her life, collapsed to the ground in tears when she heard I might go to prison. They aged overnight. I was held by the police, while my parents wept outside, heads in their hands. As for Tong Yi, the one I had protected, he stood silently in the corner, unable to offer even a word of comfort to my parents. Ruyan, standing by his side, muttered a few symbolic words of consolation to my parents, and then left with Tong Yi. Looking back now, they probably didn't return to school that night, but instead booked a room together, and I was left as the ultimate scapegoat. But tonight, after being reborn, I glanced at my phone, where I saw messages in the family group chat. One with me, Suwon Ruo, and my parents. Before going to bed, my parents had posted a picture of themselves at a restaurant. Their faces were filled with happiness. This happiness in this life belongs to me, and I will hold onto it tightly. As I turned to leave the police station, Tong Yi's and Ruyan's parents had just arrived. We passed each other, and they glanced back at me, as if they wanted to say something, but the police hurried them along, so they followed the officers instead. I stood outside the police station, watching the chaos behind me. In my previous life, the police station was where I suffered, but in this life, I will make them pay back 1,000 times. News of Tong Yi's unpaid debts and his run-in with the thugs, landing him in the police station, spread throughout the entire school that same night. He had been flaunting my sneakers and luxury items for so long that everyone believed he was some rich second-generation heir. But now, with this scandal, everyone knew he was just a fake rich kid. The next day, when I went to class, I overheard a group of boys discussing something nearby. Curious, I leaned in and asked, "What are you guys watching?" The boys exchanged awkward glances, not daring to speak. I thought for a moment, it's about Tong Yi, isn't it? Their expressions changed, and they nodded reluctantly. One of the boys, who was on good terms with me, sat beside me with his phone. "Zhang Hui, I know you and Tong Yi are close, but this video might make you mad, so we were hesitant to show you. "What video?" I asked. He raised his phone and showed me. The video had been secretly recorded from upstairs. It was from last night. The video showed Tong Yi being beaten up by those thugs outside the KTV. He was kneeling on the ground, begging them to let him go. He promised to pay them back as soon as possible. He looked nothing like the wealthy heir he pretended to be. His screams and the thugs' mocking laughter in the video were grating to the ears. I frowned slightly after watching it. Although I wanted revenge on Tong Yi and Ruyan, I despised the person who had spread this video. Noticing my expression, the boy quickly paused the video. "We don't know who uploaded it," he said. "It was everywhere by last night. Last night was Tong Yi's birthday. You were probably there too, right?" Everyone knew that I was close to Tong Yi. Tong Yi was the campus heartthrob in the art department, his perfect looks winning over the entire school. Many girls were after him, and he frequently changed girlfriends. On top of that, his arrogant personality had made him plenty of enemies. Now that this video was out, all the people who couldn't stand him were having a field day. "I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly what happened," I replied. Even though I disliked the person who leaked the video, I could never forget what I went through in my previous life because of Tong Yi. I would never forgive him. After thinking for a moment, I told the boys in the future regarding anything about Tong Yi ... You don't need to worry about me anymore. I have nothing to do with him now. Oh, old friends, now completely estranged. This story between us would be a topic of gossip for quite some time. That day, neither Ruyan nor Tong Yi showed up at school. After I sent Ruyan a breakup text, I immediately blocked both of them on WeChat, because based on what I knew about them, they would definitely try to pester me later. Who could blame me for being so naive all these years? Giving them too many benefits? After finishing my afternoon classes, I went home for a visit. In my previous life, I spent 3 years in prison, and my parents cried every day. Our family business crumbled, and everything relied on Suwon-ruo to hold it together. Even though I had already messaged them earlier, telling them I'd be home for dinner tonight, I still felt nervous as I approached the door. I took a deep breath and prepared myself mentally before pressing the doorbell. Our home was a spacious apartment with a view of the river. The porch light came on, and the housekeeper was busy in the kitchen preparing dinner. Dad was sitting in the living room watching the news. Mom opened the door, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. "Our HUA is back." I thought I had prepared myself emotionally, that I wouldn't let my feelings show. But seeing this heartwarming scene, and seeing my gentle mother, her eyes shining with love, I couldn't hold back. In that moment, standing in front of her, all my emotions surfaced. I still couldn't hold it back. My eyes reddened with tears. The mom saw me cry. She panicked. "Oh no, what happened? Did something bad happen at school?" In their eyes, I had only been at school for 2 days before coming home. But to me, it felt like I had been away for 3 long years. Finally experiencing the warmth of family again. At the dinner table, Mom and Dad kept piling food into my bowl, chatting away. Suddenly, they brought up Suwon-ruo. "By the way, your sister is coming back soon too." I paused mid-bite. After her high school exams, Suwon-ruo had chosen to study abroad. While still in school, she and some classmates started a business overseas. And from what Dad told me, it was going pretty well. In my previous life, she was probably planning to return around this time. But because of my troubles, she rushed back without hesitation, only to arrive in time to see me sentenced in court. But this time, nothing happened to me. So as planned, she would likely be coming back within the next 2 weeks. To be honest, in my past life, my relationship with Suwon-ruo had been a bit complicated. I was in my 2nd year of university when Ruyan pursued me, and we started dating one day while we were out shopping. Suwon-ruo saw us. With a stern face, she pulled me aside and told me I wasn't allowed to date. I thought she was just trying to act like family, advising me. I felt a bit annoyed. Before, you said dating before 18 was too early. But now I'm almost 20, I protested. Why do you even care about who I date? I'm your sister. What's wrong with being concerned about your relationship? You're not even my real sister. After that argument, I started avoiding her. She was a few months older than me and had already received her acceptance letter from an overseas university. She was beautiful, and although everyone called her my sister, we both knew the truth. We weren't related by blood, and it always felt like that thin veil between us could break at any moment. She was always busy, leaving early and returning late every day. Even when we ran into each other by accident, I would purposely avoid her. It wasn't until she actually left for abroad that I was still holding a grudge because she had stopped me from dating Ruyan. Who could have known that the next time we met, I would be on the verge of going to prison? Thinking back to my previous life, she, just a girl, had run all over the place trying to help me. Her once tidy, clean self had become disheveled, a far cry from her neat and meticulous habits. Even her beautiful almond-shaped eyes were bloodshot. Not a biological sister, but closer than family. After dinner, I went back to my room, took out my phone, and saw that our chat history stopped from over 2 years ago, right when she had left for abroad. I picked up the phone, wondering what I should message her. Should I apologize first and show some weakness? But in my clumsiness, I accidentally hit the voice call button. Startled, I fumbled and dropped the phone to the ground, scrambling to pick it up. I realized she had already answered the call. A gentle voice came through. Hello? I froze, unable to say a word. Suwon Ruo called my name again. Zhang. Hearing her familiar voice, my nose tingled with emotion. When I finally spoke, my voice had changed. It seemed like she could sense the tears in my voice. Her tone softened, losing its earlier calm, like a still lake that had finally been stirred by ripples. What's wrong? What happened? I sniffed, gazing at the picture on my desk of us as children. I was smiling at the camera, while the little girl looked up at me. So I opened my mouth, and across the entire Pacific, across several cities, I spoke the truest words in my heart. Suwon Ruo, I miss you. After saying that, I threw my phone aside in embarrassment. For the next few days, Tongyi and Ruyan didn't show up at school, but their scandal had already spread like wildfire. Tongyi, who had always acted so boldly, was now facing the consequences, and those he had wronged before were starting to gloat. When I walked into the classroom, everyone was whispering to each other. As I entered, they exchanged glances and gradually quieted down. After sitting down, a boy in the front row, who usually got along well with me, turned around and asked, Zhang, I heard you had a falling out with Tongyi? I responded with a simple yeah. He pressed further, why? I couldn't explain to them how horribly Tongyi had wronged me in my past life. As I hesitated, another boy nearby chimed in, what else could it be about? Because you finally saw Tongyi's true colors, right? That one sentence opened the floodgates for everyone. One comment after another. They all began discussing my friendship with Tongyi. I had always been the one giving, while Tongyi had always been taking. As they say, a favor for a bushel of rice becomes a hatred for a handful. On the 5th day after the incident, I ran into Ruyan at the dorm entrance. She was wearing a baseball cap and a face mask, obviously aware that she was under a lot of scrutiny. At first, I didn't recognize her, but when I got closer, she suddenly grabbed my arm. Startled, I flinched. She gestured for me to keep quiet. I couldn't help but smirk. Exactly because it's you. That's why I'm tempted to shout. A passerby glanced in our direction, and Ruyan quickly lowered her head, afraid of being recognized. Can we talk somewhere more private? She asked, remembering the lessons from my past life. I was now wary of her taking me to a secluded place, where she might ambush me. I chuckled coldly, removing her hand from my arm. No need, before I blocked you. I made my intentions clear. I had already sent her a message saying I wanted to break up. I thought she would have figured it out by now, so I didn't feel the need to explain further. But I was surprised she still had the nerve to confront me. As I turned to leave, she grabbed me again. Zhang Huai, you can't just break up with me like that. I know what happened between me and Tong Yi was wrong, but you can't put all the blame on me. At that time, you were arguing with me, and Tong Yi kept talking to me every day. That's how it happened. Now that I'm in trouble, you can't just ignore me. As expected, when someone cheats, their first instinct isn't to admit fault. Instead, they try to blame someone else. I turned to walk back to campus, glancing over my shoulder at her, my face full of disgust. Liu Ruyan, how did I not realize before just how shameless you are? I struggled to pull away. But to my surprise, Liu Ruyan, frustrated and desperate, dragged me even harder. People around us were watching, but no one stepped in to help. After all, most people thought a girl pulling on a guy wasn't a big deal. And with so many eyes on me, I didn't want to cause a scene. Just as I was about to use my taekwondo skills, a tall, slender figure approached from the side. The person took hold of my hand and then skillfully twisted Liu Ruyan's wrist. With a light squeeze, Liu Ruyan winced in pain and released me. The person shielded me behind them. When I looked more closely, I saw the familiar side profile. It was Suwon Ruo. She was half a head shorter than me, but her presence was undeniable. She glared fiercely at Liu Ruyan. I warned you 2 years ago to stay away from him, didn't I? Suwon Ruo had returned from studying abroad, carrying the confident aura of an elite. Her commanding presence was overwhelming. With the crowd's attention and whispers growing louder, Liu Ruyan had no choice but to flee, like a turtle retreating into its shell. Suwon Ruo turned to meet my gaze. The weather had been getting colder these days, and she was wearing a long black coat, looking both cool and effortlessly stylish. I was still lost in admiration for how striking she looked. In the next second, she knocked her knuckle lightly against my forehead. Is dating really that fun? I rubbed my forehead, looking at her in disbelief. This little thing really holds grudges, doesn't she? Suwon Ruo said she was taking me home for dinner. I followed her into the car, only to realize that her high school classmate was driving. Back in the day, whenever they had their girls' gatherings, they'd sometimes ask me to be the chauffeur. Now, those little girls had all grown up and could drive themselves. As soon as her friends saw me, she started winking and teasing. Oh my, Zhang Huai, you're looking so handsome these days. No wonder someone couldn't wait to pick you up right after landing, before even going home. If I had such a good-looking brother, I'd fly over to see him too. Before she could finish her sentence, Suwon Ruo threw a pillow at her. After everything that happened in my previous life, getting to meet her again this time felt so precious. I was naturally overjoyed. We both sat in the back seat, and I turned to her. Didn't Mom and Dad say you wouldn't be back for a few more days? Why are you here today? Before Suwon Ruo could answer, the friend driving was shaking with suppressed laughter, her shoulders trembling. Suwon Ruo, looking a bit uncomfortable, adjusted her posture and said, "Didn't you tell me to come back sooner?" When did I tell you to come back sooner? That day, I clearly said, "I miss you." Suddenly, I froze. It had been over 2 years since I last saw Suwon Ruo. She was still the same Suwon Ruo I knew, yet there was something different about her now. Outside the window, the bustling city passed by, while inside the car, her profile remained focused ahead, in the quiet enclosed space. My heart suddenly began to race. I quietly turned my head away, pretending to look at my phone. But instead, I found myself searching. Is it normal in adolescence to develop sudden, inexplicable feelings for someone? Family reunion. Watching the scene before me, my eyes reddened slightly, but I didn't want Ruyan to see and misunderstand. After dinner, I returned to my room, and not long after, she knocked on my door. Once I gave permission, she stepped inside, looking me up and down for a moment. Then she spoke. Still upset about breaking up with that little green tea? I sat on the windowsill, while Ruyan sat at my desk. Our eyes met, and my heart inexplicably started racing again. I quickly looked away, but Ruyan kept her gaze locked on me. I didn't dare meet her eyes, feeling guilty. Ruyan seemed a little angry. What's so great about her anyway? If you broke up, then it's over. You shouldn't date anymore, she added. Just focus on learning how to manage the company. I mumbled under my breath. You're too young to be locking up your heart like that. Ruyan paused for a second, then let out a light whistle. As for me, I didn't care. Ruyan, through a mutual friend, tried to contact me again. In response, I immediately posted on my Moments feed, declaring that Ruyan and I had already broken up. I added, if anyone tries to play the middleman, don't blame me for blocking you too. After that post, the world went quiet. Regarding Tongyi's situation, Ruyan had been a victim too, but public opinion can be terrifying. Rumors spread that while Tongyi was being beaten by the thugs, Ruyan was dragged into an alley and raped by them. As the gossip intensified, someone who had been on medical leave posted on their feed, saying they saw Ruyan at the hospital's obstetrics department. They even shared a photo of Ruyan standing outside the clinic. That post seemed to confirm the rumors of her rape, and it left no doubt that the child was from the assault. But it was said that she didn't even have enough money for an abortion. Once admired, Ruyan and Tongyi were now despised by everyone, like rats scurrying through the streets. As for Tongyi, in his attempt to protect Ruyan, he had hit one of the thugs with a brick, and it was said the thug was now in a vegetative state. Tongyi's parents hired a lawyer, claiming it was self-defense. But just when things seemed to be settling down, someone leaked a video showing Tongyi hitting that thug with a brick. After the thug collapsed unconscious on the ground, Tongyi continued hitting him several more times with the brick. Once the video came out, it was clear this wasn't self-defense anymore. In the end, Tongyi was sentenced to pay a large sum in compensation to the thug, and was given an 8-year prison sentence. All the suffering I endured in my previous life had now become his retribution. Our school is a prestigious university, and the value of the diploma is high. With graduation nearing, I doubted he could make it to the finish line. When he returned to school, he was met with endless rumors and gossip. One day, while eating in the cafeteria, I saw him sitting alone, with people whispering all around him. He looked like he wanted to bury his face in his food. This wasn't the first time he had been in a situation like this. Someone said Ruyan had gotten involved with Mixao, one of the thugs. Everyone started to isolate her. During PE class, when partners were chosen freely, no one picked her. Back then, I stepped in, crushing the rumors, and firmly took her hand. But now, I just wanted to stand back and watch her face the consequences. Maybe someone had gone too far with their words, because suddenly Ruyan lost control and stood up, throwing her tray onto the floor. She screamed, "I wasn't raped by those thugs. They didn't even touch me." A boy jeered, "Then why were you in the obstetrics department? Going to get a hemorrhoid removed?" The whole cafeteria burst into laughter. Ruyan shrieked, "The baby is Tongyi's. It's not from the thug." "I wasn't violated by those thugs," she cried desperately. That sentence landed like a bomb. After a brief moment of silence, the room erupted with exclamations of disbelief. Then, those who knew about my relationship with Tongyi looked at me with pity in their eyes. I could feel a twitch at the corner of my mouth. I had picked an ex-girlfriend who ended up being involved with someone with a criminal record. Even the guy sitting across from me quietly pushed his chicken drumstick onto my plate. "Eat more, man," he said. "You've been through enough." Later, Ruyan came to find me again, this time to ask me for money for an abortion. She looked just as pitiful as always, her eyes red as she appeared at the entrance of my apartment complex. From a distance, I saw her running toward me as I carried some fruit. She tried to help me carry it. I dodged her with a swift turn. "Say what you need to say." She didn't beat around the bush. "Zhang, I know what I did with Tong Yi was terrible. But can you forgive me just this once? I swear I'll never do it again. My parents found out I'm pregnant, and they're so ashamed. They won't let me come home, and they've cut me off financially. They told me to get the surgery done, and I have no one else to turn to but you." The more she spoke, the more wrong it sounded. "So what you're saying is, my friend and my girlfriend hooked up, got pregnant, and now I'm supposed to pay for the abortion?" She froze for a moment, but in the next second, her eyes filled with tears again. "Zhang, I know I've wronged you. I'm begging you, just help me this once. And there's one more thing," she added. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. I handed her the list. "These are all the things you've taken from me over the years. I expect you to return them all in perfect condition. If you can't, then I'll have no choice but to sue you." The list included items ranging from coats worth thousands to designer bags that cost tens of thousands, all of which she had taken after getting involved with Tong Yi. She took them from me one by one, and over time, the total added up to well over 100,000. Well, that kind of money wasn't a big deal for me. I simply didn't want to let her off easily. Tong Yi came from a poor family. His parents ran a street stall to make ends meet. Ryan's family was better off, but nowhere near as wealthy as mine. When she got together with Tong Yi, she probably spent quite a lot of money on him too. But now that Tong Yi was in prison, she was in an even worse situation. Her situation had become even worse. Ryan took the paper from me, glanced at it, and stared at me in disbelief. "Zhang, do you really have to be this ruthless?" I didn't know how to explain to her that I had been reborn, but I decided to tell her in a different way. I looked at her, smiled faintly. "Do you know something? I had a dream. In that dream, I went to Tong Yi's birthday party. I was the one who killed the thug. And then you refused to testify for me in court. I spent 3 years in prison, and you and Tong Yi got married. You even had this child." Ryan's face paled at my words. She visibly flinched, but tried to maintain her composure. "How could that even be possible? How could I ever refuse to testify for you? We've known each other for so many years. I knew her well enough. During these days, she and Tong Yi must have considered, what if I had gone to Tong Yi's birthday? What if I had been the one who killed the thug?" But she wouldn't admit it. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I turned to leave with my things. "You have 1 week to return everything, otherwise I'll proceed with legal action." After saying that, I ignored her desperate pleas and walked into the apartment complex. I hadn't walked more than a few steps when someone snatched the bag of fruit from my hand. Thinking it was Ryan, I instinctively spun around and launched a taekwondo move. But before I knew it, my waist was grabbed, and I received a punch to the stomach. That's when I realized it was Ruo. She hit me while grabbing the fruit, looking as if she was in an unusually good mood. She seemed to be in an unusually good mood. Why the sudden change of heart? Weren't you just saying you'd stay with her forever? She had probably overheard everything earlier. I decided to be honest. "It's because of a dream I had." "What did you dream about?" "I dreamed that Mom and Dad were heartbroken, crying because I went to prison. And I also dreamed about you." Suwonru's steps faltered in the dim, hazy glow of the streetlights. Our eyes met. "So, when you said you missed me the other day, It was because of that dream? Not for any other reason? Maybe it was the warmth of the night breeze, or perhaps the softness in her gaze. But I suddenly felt something different. She came back early from abroad because of those 3 words, I miss you. She didn't even go home after getting off the plane. Just brought her suitcase straight to my school. After all the awkwardness of adolescence, I used to avoid eye contact with her. But maybe after experiencing life and death in my previous life, I suddenly felt braver. Suwon-ruo, what do you think would happen if I tried to pursue you? Would mom and dad break my legs? Suwon-ruo's expression immediately changed, becoming serious in an instant. Who told you to say something like that? Her sternness caught me off guard. And for a moment I thought she didn't like me. I cautiously glanced at her. Why are you being so serious all of a sudden? I just realized something. I've had feelings for you for years, but I kept thinking of you as my little sister, so I pushed those thoughts away. If you don't feel the same way, I can stop liking you, okay? Why are you being so harsh? But then she said, you can't just kind of like me. You have to really like me. Right now, we get along like family. But if we get together and then break up because you don't like me enough, we won't just lose a relationship. We'll lose being each other's family. So you have to like me a lot. Seeing me hesitate, she smiled, her eyes curving into crescents. Then she poked my forehead gently. I'll give you time. Think it over carefully. When you're sure, I'll talk to mom and dad for you. Mom and dad dote on me more. Later that night, while they were asleep, I quietly snuck into Suwon-ruo's room. She was still sitting at her desk, working on her computer. I went straight to her bed and sat down. I want to ask you something. Without turning away from her screen, Suwon-ruo kept typing. What is it? Remember in your senior year, that underclassman who gave me a love letter to pass on to you? What happened between you two? I still remembered back then. I had some feelings for Suwon-ruo, though I tried to ignore them. But everyone thought of me as her real older brother. And plenty of underclassmen would give me favors, just to hand over love letters to her. One of them was particularly memorable, the heartthrob of the high school. He carried himself like a prince. Even Tongyi looked like a servant next to him. That left quite an impression on me. But Suwon-ruo looked at me, completely confused. Who? The guy who played piano, the one everyone called the school prince. She shrugged, I don't remember. Feeling a little smug, I waved my fist jokingly. Well, if I find out you were lying, any guy you're seeing is in for trouble. After a while, I asked, so when did you start liking me? She smiled, I slowly grew to like you. By the time I realized it, I liked you a lot. I was pretty satisfied with that answer. I stayed a bit longer in her room, enjoying the moment. But then Suwon-ruo glanced at me and said, I think you should head back soon. Before, I thought of you as my brother, so it didn't matter if you slept in my bed. But now, since you said you like me, it's not proper for us to be this close anymore. I pouted, making a silly face at her before leaving the room. When the deadline came, Ruyan didn't return the things she owed me as promised. I expected this, knowing how vain she was. Most of the valuable things she took from me were probably already sold off. She came begging for my forgiveness, but I stood firm on my principles. I hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit. 2 weeks later, to my surprise, Ruyan managed to pay back everything. I was puzzled until I overheard some gossip from my classmates. They said Ruyan had found herself a wealthy boyfriend. Apparently, he was quite a bit older, with a beer belly and thinning hair, and he was married. But it didn't seem to bother her, even though she was still carrying someone else's child. He paid for her abortion, so Ruyan had become someone's mistress. By senior year, everyone was starting their internships. I moved out of the dorm as well. Suwon-ruo's company, which she started with her friends, had grown significantly, and they ended up renting a villa. She rarely came home anymore. After I moved out of the dorm, I would often drive to pick her up after work. She would sit in the passenger seat. As the ginkgo leaves line the autumn streets with golden yellow, I turned, took her hand, and said, Suwanruo, I've made up my mind. I really like you. And I want to be with you for a long time. She paused for a moment, then smiled at me and said, all right. As for convincing our parents, I trusted Suwanruo to handle it. After all, in our family, they favor daughters over sons. If I were the one to bring it up, Mom and Dad would definitely break my legs. In my previous life, I was always in a rush, and there wasn't a single person who truly cared for me. I will never let go of her hand again in this life.